Hello and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to draw a still life using soft pastels. But before we start drawing, we're going to set up our objects first. So take your time and set up your objects. As you can see here, I have a few objects. I'm not going to make this too complicated. Ideally, up to 3 objects are good. So as you can see, I have my drapery here, and I have a wine bottle and a coconut shell, a small plant, and a walnut. I'm using some fake flowers as well. I'm going to just play around with these objects, maybe take some apart and put some more and see which one looks better if I would put one in front of the other. You also want to consider the dimensions of each object and their material quality when you're putting them together. Since it's going to be colorful, you also want to consider the colors of the objects that you're selecting for your still life. So once you take your time, maybe around 10 to 15 minutes, it depends. Maybe you'll end up spending an hour setting up your objects, but take a few pictures and use that as a reference photo. If you have enough space that you can just set up your still life and draw it while you are looking at it, I much prefer that you do that. That would be very good for your observational skills to just look at from the life and draw from the life. But if that's not the possibility, you're going to take a reference photo and use that for drawing your still life. Now that we have taken a few reference photos, before we start drawing right away, I'm going to ask you to do a few sketches in your sketchbook. And so you can just take your sketchbook and divide one page into 4 sections. It doesn't have to be perfect. And do a very kind of quick sketch of different photos that you have taken and see which one you feel more aligned with to draw. For example, here in this small section, I'm just going to do a quick sketch of this photo that I have taken. Okay, and I'm just gonna put the objects kind of very quick. They don't have to be perfect, just the overall shape of them, how big they are. And then there's this little plant. And then in another section, I'll do another photo that I have taken. Maybe a little bit, there's more room around it. So you want to always start from your baseline, the horizon line. So here is our horizon line, but I have a little bit of corner there. And then if we give more space, then our objects are going to be smaller. So again, see, I'm not trying to make it perfect. I'm just doing very quick sketches of these photos, kind of get a better idea. And then maybe I can do a couple that are horizontal. I tried a few other photos with adding another object inside this coconut shell, so I'm gonna try this and see if it's gonna work, and so on. And so you'll just choose one based on your sketches, and you will see which one works better, whether you go vertical or horizontal, the amount of space that you want to give to your objects. We don't want to do anything that is very close up. Let's say here is the bottle. The wine bottle is this big, and then we have the flowers, this plant right in front of our eyes, and then the coconut shell, we just see just a tiny bit of it here maybe, and then we don't even get to see other objects, and the background is just all drapery that we have with whatever color. We don't want to do this, but we can consider the ones that have enough space around the objects, and we can have a good perspective of what's happening there. All right, so this is the photo that I chose to go ahead with and draw this still life. So we're going to be using Fabriano Tiziano because it has a little bit of tooth, and this is the most suitable paper for drawing soft pastels on. You can blend it really nicely on this paper. And so we are choosing a paper that is not white. I'm choosing to go ahead with gray. You can also choose brown or kind of greenish gray if you want. And it allows to capture the light much better when you have a neutral color paper or different than the white paper. We're going to start with our drawing. I'm going to choose a lighter color because this is darker so I can see, and I'm not going to press too hard. I'm going to use a side of my soft pastels. If you have your pastels are large and big like this, just use the corner so you can draw nice clean lines. So we're going to get started with our horizon line right away. So here is where my horizon line is based on my reference photo, and then there is this little bit of corners happening, so I'm going to put the corner right in there. Okay, and so we want to always start from the biggest objects to the smallest objects. So my biggest object here is my drapery. I'm going to include it. Now at this point, I'm not going to include too many details, just kind of quick note of where everything is, where everything starts and ends. So if I look at my reference photo and where flowers are, they start somewhere around here, and then here is the head of the wine bottle that I have. So to draw that wine bottle, we're just going to draw a vertical line to create a symmetry. Here's the base, and I'm going to measure that wine bottle. It's in front of me, and I see that the neck is almost 1/3 of the height of this bottle. So if I was going to divide this into 3 equal sections, this is how tall that neck is going to be. So I'm going to just draw the neck all the way up to here, and then from neck below it starts getting wider, and then the bottom is the widest. And now I just connect these dots together. So at this point, I'm not going to put too much pressure on my medium. Just to sketch the very first drawing. And I may want to erase some areas, so I'm going to leave some room for that. My next biggest object is this plant that is in front of the wine bottle. It starts somewhere around here, so it's covering the lower part of the bottle. It's not a huge plant. So, and I'm just following all the simple geometric shapes. I'm going to deconstruct each object into the simplest geometric shape that I can identify. Again, I'm not gonna get into all the little leaves of this plant because that's too soon, and that's part of the details that we can add later. Next object is this other coconut shell, the third part of this wine bottle. As you can see, I'm just taking my time with this drawing. I'm not rushing it, and I try to get the forms as best as possible and see how much space is between the objects. Look at all the negative space around my objects, how that space looks like. That also shapes each object. Okay, and our smallest object is walnut. Again, I try to simplify all the forms into the simplest geometric shape that I can find and see in my reference photo or your objects if they are sitting in front of you. All the flowers, because we need to still draw the background first. All right, now that we have our drawing, I'm going to start with light and shadows. So we're going to identify all the lights that we see and add a little bit of white on there, and identify all the shadows that we see and add a little bit of a darker tone. And as we are doing this, if I notice that, my proportion of this object is not as accurate that I thought, I'm just going to fix it as I go. And you can always also erase anything that you don't like with pastels on this paper, but I do not recommend using the eraser as much as possible, because you can just blend it in and not make too much mess by trying to erase, unless it's very, very necessary. Okay, so I'm going to use a little bit of wider side of my pastel to get better shading and thicker lines versus the thin lines that we used for drawing. So I look at my reference photo, or if I have my objects in front of me, I look at where I see the most light. And we can start again from the biggest object, which is my drapery here. And I try to just starting and adding the light on the way. So my drapery has quite a bit of folds on it. I'm not going to try and draw all of the folds, but some of it is necessary for the drawing, so I'll just add it. Here you'll always want to pay attention where the light is coming from. Right now, for the way that I have set up my objects, the light is coming from the window, and so I try to capture it as I see it. And you want to also keep your lines when you are doing this hatching and cross hatching within the same direction, or ideally with the direction of where the light is coming from. So I see all this entire foreground is quite lighter versus my background, so I'm just going to use the entire width of my pastel to cover this. If you have difficulty identifying the light from shadows, you can always do this technique. I call it squinting technique. When you squint your eyes and you look at either your objects in front of you or your reference photo, everything becomes very clear where the light is coming from and where the dark is coming from. So that can always be very helpful. Now let's look at the next large object. Now let's add our dark. So we have finished with our light, and now we want to start with our dark. For your dark, pay attention to the colors of the objects that you have. You want to pick a darker tone of the same color. For example, if my drapery is blue and there are some folds that are getting darker, I'm going to be using a darker blue for the shadows. And if the wine bottle is green, I'm going to be using a darker green for the darker areas of it. You can also use brown or black, but I highly recommend to not start with black as it flattens your drawing. So start with something slightly lighter and you can always go darker later. So the darkest area that I see is the soil inside this plant. So I'm just going to cover this area with a little bit of blue, and then everything that is under the objects, where the objects are sitting, is much darker. And if it's much darker, feel free to press harder. Play around with the amount of pressure that you're applying to get the right tone from these colors. Of course, adding these colors to your drawing does make the drawing more complicated, but it's much more fun than trying to draw a monochromatic black and white drawing. And again, as I'm applying colors and light and shadows, I can always keep editing. Okay, now that we have applied our light and shadows overall, we're going to start blending them in. So you can use your hand, your finger, or you can use one of the blending tools that I showed you earlier in the course. So this is the fun part actually. You can just go around each object and just blend these colors. Don't worry about the areas that don't have anything on them yet. As you know, we are working in layers, so this is just one of the layers that we are applying. We'll go over it again and again with more layers, so be patient and build it up. It's almost the same value as the coconut shell here. Okay, now that I have done my very first layer of blending, I can now see better what areas are much lighter and what areas are much darker. And so looking at my reference photo, I see that my overall drapery, entire background, is much lighter than, let's say, the wine bottle or this plant. I'm going to apply white to all the surface area of the background, considering where the light was. So I'm just gonna go over those areas once more before I cover all the other areas. And as I'm doing this, I can pay a little bit more attention to some more details if I can add them. There's not too much emphasis on getting all the details, but getting the overall theme of this drawing correct. So getting the objects correct and the overall shape of everything. Now, if you do have a lighter pastel of the color that you're looking for example, my drapery is light blue and I do have a light blue, so I'm going to use the light blue as well. If you don't have that right color, then we will be mixing it as we add more layers using the light and dark colors that we have. Now that we have